Hello everyone, my name is Cosmify, and given that episode 6 of the Amazing Digital Circus was not only 33 minutes long, but also the longest episode yet of the entire series, there's bound to be a lot of things that some, including myself, I'll admit, didn't notice or realize upon first viewing. So in this video, I'm going to be going over things you may have missed in Digital Circus episode 6. Hope you enjoy. Also, I know I'm like a week and a half late, but in the words of Ragatha,
let's forget about all that.
So first of all, I want to talk about Jax, as if I haven't done enough of that already, but the reason I want to start by discussing him specifically is because of this scene right here. Now, there is some debate about whether or not this was an abstraction scene or simply a panic attack, but that's honestly a video for another day. What I'm concerned about right now is the text written on the mirror, because if you brighten the screen like a true theorist would, you'll see that it says chill, fella, Felix. Some people think it says Felix and that's his real name or something, but I personally think it looks more like fella. There also appears to be other smudges on the mirror, but I wasn't able to discern anything besides the text, so if you see something that I don't, feel free to leave it in the comments. But yeah, this could either be one of those things where the asset developers just snuck something into the scene as a joke, or more interestingly, it could imply that someone has been here before in the past. Either way, I thought it was pretty interesting. Also, speaking about Jax, there were a few times throughout the episode before the argument scene where he appeared to divert conversations with Pomni in order to make sure they don't get too personal, which is kind of in reference to Jax's overall desire to forestall her from learning about him any further than he wants her to at the moment. One specific scene that immediately came to mind for me upon rewatching the episode was this one right here. It's pretty subtle, but pay close attention.
How about pomegranates?
Awful.
I'm learning a lot about you today.
Let's not forget we're here to kill people.
Yeah, so right after Pomni says she's learning a lot about him, Jax immediately tries to change the subject back to the task at hand, which is winning the game. I found this very interesting because it just gives us an even deeper understanding as to how his mind works. Because, like, he wants to open up to Pomni, as I explained in my previous video about him, but at the same time, I think he's scared of the grief that he himself would have at the loss of her, which also kind of serves as a way of protecting himself from being hurt, while also protecting her from abstracting, assuming he actually cares about her, and I think he does. Also, I made a YouTube short about this recently, but do you remember when Jax was explaining his worldview, or at least a facade-like version of his worldview? And he categorized every character into an archetype, which in this context seems like less of an archetype and more like a stereotype due to how dehumanizing it is. Not only is it dehumanizing, it's also just flat out wrong, as even though Jax's assessments are correct on a very surface level, not only with the other characters, but this is also applicable to himself as well, they don't do a good job at defining the nuances of each character. I'm sorry for using the word nuance, it's like a buzzword at this point. But he says Ragatha is the cheerful one, and in this very episode, she was not. He says Kinger is the crazy one, even though in this episode and times before it, he has more awareness than even Jax himself sometimes. And with every single person that he tried to dilute into a single word length of archetype, he ended up missing the mark. The last thing that I'm going to talk about with regards to Jax, I think, is the way that he looked at Kaufmo and Ribbit's doors. After Zubul got both of them and ran away, Pomni went to chase after them and left Jax by himself. When Jax looked at Kaufmo's door, which is very nearby, he made an angry expression, whereas when he looked at Ribbit's door, his expression was completely blank. Now, we don't really know that much when it comes to the relationships that Jax had with either of them, but it's somewhat implied that Jax was at least cordial with Kaufmo and closer with Ribbit than anyone else. I honestly don't think that the angry expression he makes here is meant to be a show of malice or dislike towards Kaufmo, but rather a sort of anger at his abstraction because it was someone that Jax was likely friends with. Ribbit's abstraction, though, judging by the blank stare, seems to have been much more impactful. Hopefully we'll be able to learn much more about this in the next episode, and judging by some of the things Gooseworks has been saying recently, it is going to be a very important one. Anyway, that is also a video for another day. Now to talk about some other things you may not have noticed, specifically about Caine actually, because whether you noticed it or not, Jax is not the only one that has had things going on. The main difference between Jax and Caine here is that Jax's problems were much more front and center in episode 6, whereas Caine's have kind of been slowly marinating since around episode 3. Specifically within episode 6 though, a few major things in regards to Caine happened in my eyes at least. Number 1, early on in the episode, for the very first time ever, he appears to adopt a stoic demeanor when Zubul complains that they don't like the adventure. He says that he has to plan for the Digital Circus award show, which is hilarious because he spends basically the entire first part of the episode after that just lounging around. I do think this is funny, yes, but it is a little concerning because of the fact that, like I alluded to a minute ago, this is the very first time that Caine has appeared to not care about the prospect of someone not enjoying the current planned adventure, so I would would say that is kind of alarming because it is a major change in what we are used to from his character. And he also doesn't help Bubble, which is less alarming and more just outright sad. I mean, look at the poor guy. However, something else happened with Caine in this episode towards the very end, which was also important to me. And this is actually something that I did miss upon first viewing because Digital Circus, to my knowledge, has never added any kind of post-credit scene before. Anyway, lo and behold, here it is. Caine is looking upon the empty auditorium after the award show ends and checks to see how many votes he got just out of curiosity, and to no one's surprise, if you looked at the results of the voting on the Wacky Watch website, ended up with way less votes than everyone and way less votes than he probably expected. 0, in fact, which is just a tiny little bit less than the final amount that he actually had on the real website. Now, obviously, they were doing animation for this episode a good while before the voting happened, but even so, it's pretty impressive that they came this close to predicting who was and wasn't gonna get most of the votes. But anyway, upon realizing this, Caine glitches out, and the colors used for his eyes are actually a reference to the cover for the video game of the story Digital Circus is based on. I have no mouth and I must scream. But also, with respect to this scene, the original storyboard for it appears to have added details like this black right here, which may indicate that the original intent for this scene would be to showcase how close he was to abstracting, or at least building the foundations for something like that to happen. Very interesting indeed, although we don't really know whether or not Caine can abstract yet, because it seems to be a very divisive opinion. But once again, for the 4th time, that's a video for another day. I've said that so many times already. Something that also piqued my interest is the fact that Caine appears to have pictures of the CNA office, and I'm not even gonna comment on this one. There is literally an ocean of variety when it comes to possible theories that could stem from this. So this, along with other things, is also for another video. Anyway, as for other slightly less important, just like cool things that I noticed in the background of scenes, we have my personal favorite right here. Don't see it? Well, that, my friends, is Uzi's sick as hell railgun from Murder Drones. Very glad to see things like this making an appearance, especially since it's from Murder Drones of all places. Very good show. Also, speaking of guns, this Tommy gun kinda looks like the drum gun from Fortnite. Perhaps that has something to do with the fact that Glitch does their lighting work in Unreal Engine 5, which happens to be the same engine that runs the graphics for Fortnite, which is pretty cool. Anyway, briefly back to Caine for a minute, because I forgot to mention the fact that Daisy Bell specifically is the song that he's singing to Zooble, and I found this interesting because, in case you didn't know, Daisy Bell is the first song ever sung by a computer, somewhat akin to the fact that Caine spelled backwards is ENIAC, which is the name of the first computer ever made. And because this is an episode of Digital Circus, there was an appearance of the number 57, kind of, when Caine said to meet them at the stage in 5.7 minutes at the beginning of the episode.
Meet you guys up at the stage in, let's say, 5.7 minutes.
And to this day, we still have no idea what 57 means. Maybe one day Gooseworks will tell us, but apparently it's an inside joke of hers. And last, but certainly not least, in terms of the current state of the Wacky Watch website after the episode has dropped and the voting has concluded, there is currently a low-quality picture of Ming with text next to it that says, "Your winner." That appears to have a hidden message or something in it if you zoom in. Either that or the font is just terrible. But yeah, that's about everything that you may not have noticed and stuff I didn't notice as well. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it. I will take any excuse that I can to rewatch this episode, but I'm gonna go to sleep now. Bye-bye.